That's totally fine. I am going to be referencing some things, but no worries on that front. And I'd love to hear who we have here with us today. If you want to go ahead and share in the chat what, who do we have with us today? Are you currently a manager? Are you a director? Maybe you're a trustee. What library are you at? And you can go ahead and share in the chat, and I look forward to seeing who we have here. And if you were at the first session, if you weren't, again, no worries, but we are excited to have you here with us today. So for the people that didn't make it last week, I just want to quickly share what we covered. It does tie into today, but like I said, the two can stand on their own. So last week, we laid the foundation for your HR framework. We showed how to create strong job descriptions. We talked about policies that you should have. We talked about some of the legal things that come up and when to contact an attorney. And all of that is to help you with the employee life cycle, which is what we're really going to focus on today. So today, now that we have the foundation, we're going to talk about how to get and retain staff and sometimes to say goodbye. So we're going to start with hiring. What does that look like, and what are some of the things that you should put in place when you think about hiring? We're going to go through onboarding, both as a library, and then what do you need to think about when you're onboarding someone in an individual department. Then we're going to turn to the stuff that is not ever as much fun, discipline, and how do you deal with someone that is not performing. And then termination. Termination actually means two different things. When we use the term that in like kind of official HR jargon actually just means someone is leaving. We tend to use it, at least in libraries I found, to mean that someone was fired, but we're going to be talking both about someone that leaves voluntarily, like maybe they got a new job or they're retiring, as well as someone that was terminated due to poor job performance. And then just like when we bring someone in, we need to talk about how to offboard people. And so we're going to go through the end of the employee life cycle and talk about how do you successfully offboard someone. So I hope that that will be helpful. And I'm looking at the chat, and it looks like we still have a lot of people that were here last week and a wide variety of people, which is wonderful. Some people that are school, some people that are new to managing, some people that have been managing for a while. And so wherever you are at some point, if you are managing people, you are probably going to be doing this. You are going to be hiring people. And so when we talk about the hiring process, it doesn't start with interviewing, which is what we're going to be focusing most on today. It actually starts with job descriptions, which we talked about last week. You first need to know, what job are you hiring for? What do you need the person to do? The job description will inform the job ad. And we're not going to be going through how to write a job ad today, but there is one piece of advice I want to give you all. Please, when you write a job ad, don't have it be a job description. I so often see job ads posted, and it's painful, where they are giving people all of the information, but they are not selling why you would want to come work at that library. People don't have any sense of like, what is the environment like? So when you are soliciting candidates, I hope that you remember that the job ad is essentially a sales pitch. Yes, you want to get someone who is going to be able to do the job, but they're also evaluating you as the employer. And so before you post any of the job ad or you think about the interview questions, one of the things that I want you to think about is, what are the areas that you need them to be skilled in? And this should be reflected in the job description. We're going to use the same sample we did last week, which is thinking about hiring a children's librarian. And because that's my background and I like children's librarians, I like other librarians too, and other staff. But we're going to talk about if you're hiring someone for a youth services area, what do you need? And so the first thing that you want to think about is defining key areas. Now, when I put together a job ad and interview questions, and we're going to talk about rubrics today, one of the things I think about is what are the buckets or categories that I need? And so for me, youth services specific skills, obviously for a children's person, technology skills, technology is a thing that we all need to be comfortable with. We also, for me at my library, we always have a section on values alignment. That's where we check in with the person and we talk about whether or not they are aligned with our core values like lifelong learning and collaboration, innovation and inclusion. And so you want to be able to test and see, like, would this person, do they align with our values? This is not to say that the person has to align personality wise. People fall into the trap of hiring people that are like themselves, which is a dangerous thing. And I'm going to show you how not to do that today. And then the last thing is to think about project management. This is something that for me, we do a lot of projects at my library, so we focus on. Your key areas might be very different, but when you're hiring someone, I want you to think about what are some of the key areas that you need them to be well versed in. And with that, then it will help you think about what do you need to do to decide who to interview. And so that's what we're going to start with. When you have a job ad and you get a bunch of candidates, how do you actually pick who to bring in? Well, hopefully, like I said, you've already thought about what are the skills needed, and you've used your job description to help you form that. I like to create a rubric. This is something that I was not taught about in library school or in any of the management classes that I took. This is what our candidate review rubric that I like to use looks like. And I use this because it is very easy to fall into the trap of, oh, this person reminds me of myself. I really like them. We all have hidden biases. We all are coming to the table with different lived experiences. I grew up in and around the Chicagoland area. I was from a middle-class family and who prioritized education. I tend to prioritize formal education when I look at things. Having a rubric that tells me how I'm looking at things helps me realize where sometimes some of my own biases are showing up. This is going to help you eliminate bias. This is not going to be oh, I'm using the rubric and that's going to make my decision. A rubric is a tool. And what you want to do is you want to think about what are those things. So as you can see here, we have like minimum qualifications. So for us, we need to have someone that has worked with children before. Maybe they were a babysitter, maybe they worked in a daycare, maybe they worked in another library. Whatever it was, that is like our baseline. Who, do they have the minimum skills necessary? And then what are some of those other key areas that I just laid out for you, and how are they in terms of the values alignment? I like to have at least two people look over resumes. I usually do interviews with another person. Not every library can do that. Not every library has enough staff to be able to do that. But this is a good tool to use even if you're doing it yourself. I use a 3-point rating system. So it's basically like, do they have the skill? Do I see it anywhere in their cover letter or their resume? Yes or no? Or have they added a lot more? Some people have told me, like, I prefer a 5-point rating system. You need to do what works for you. I will tell you that from a how our brains work perspective, we know that our brains do best if they have fewer choices that they have to parse through, which fair, right? So 3 is a system that our brains can easily go through and not agonize, like, well, I really wish there was a 4.5. So this is something that when you're thinking about reviewing candidates, keep it easy. It is a tool to help you be able to look at things and take a step back and really be able to reflect on, does this person possibly have the skills that we need? It might not answer every question. Like there are some people that don't have great cover letters or resumes, depending on the position. And that is where the interview is so key. So before you get into who are we going to interview, we need to think about what do you actually need for the interview process. And this is not a one size fits all. So first, I want you to ask yourselves a couple questions. How many interviews are needed? If you are hiring for a part-time shelver position, bringing them in for 3 interviews is too much. That's ridiculous, right? If, however, you are hiring a department manager and you want to interview and then you want to bring them back maybe for a second round and have them do a presentation or have them meet with staff, that's realistic. But remember, people are taking possibly time off of work to do this. You don't want the interview process to become a part-time job for them. You also want to think about what type of interview do you want to do? Are you going to do a phone interview for the first one? Are you going to have in-person interviews? Are you going to do the interviews on Zoom or Teams? Will staff have a chance to interview the candidate? And then thinking about who needs to be involved. This again is going to depend on the position. Um, like I said, for a shelver position, you might have an in-person interview. But for a manager position, you might have a phone screening and then an in-person interview. Maybe you bring in managers to meet with them, or maybe you have like a casual, meet and greet where staff can ask questions. You also want to think about, do you need a presentation or a sample? When we hire, we have a graphic designer at my library. We ask them to put together a sample. We give all of the candidates, usually it's for the final candidates, so they're usually 2 or 3, and we ask them to create a poster or do, something that would tell us how do they go through and then have us talk through the process. With all of these, the thing that you want to remember is not every position needs a super in-depth process. And not every person, like if you are asking someone to do a presentation, but they're not ever going to have to do a presentation as part of their job, is that really necessary? So you really want to stop and think about what information do I need to know? And that goes back to then having those questions that you thought about, like what are the key areas that I need to gauge? And then once you know that, then you want to think about, oh, okay, I know that we need these 4 key areas. Then you're going to think about, how do I get that information? I had a really bad habit when I used to interview people of asking a million questions. Okay, not actually a million, but I would ask sometimes 30 questions for an interview. That is too much. And so you need to think about, what information do I actually need to get in order to make an informed decision? The goal here isn't to know every single thing this person ever did. The goal is to get enough information to make an informed decision. And this is where the next rubric can also come in. I'm going to give you sample rubrics in the resources so you will have access to all of these and can see and play around with them. This is something that you want to use once you've decided, like, okay, we're going to interview people. It's going to be an in-person interview for a children's librarian position. What I like to do is have a rubric designed so each question gets a score. And again, the score isn't so that the rubric is going to be the deciding factor. It's a tool to help you evaluate the candidates. And just like with the candidate review, you want to have a 3-point system. The system that I use starts with week. So this is where they when I ask a question, they don't really tell me a lot of information, or they don't seem to show that they have any skills. Then if that gets a 1, then 2 is, okay, they've talked about the story times or other programs they've done. They've talked about collection development, or, oh, they just finished school and they just took a children's lit class. They show that they're interested, like, yeah, I know I might not be as strong in this, but I'm excited and this is what I'm doing to learn. So they're showing a willingness to learn. And then to get a 3, this is someone that's like, yes, not only have I learned all of the children's lit stuff, but I also have, gained knowledge this way, and this is how I stay up to date. And you're like, oh my gosh, you were on the Newbery Awards Committee? That's so cool, right? Like, this is like someone who's above and beyond. These are what I use. Again, these are not, you don't have to use these exactly, but you need to come up with a system that's going to work for you so that you can know whether or not the person has the necessary skills to do the job. Then you need to actually think about what questions are you going to ask. As I said, we have these 4 key areas. When you have these areas defined ahead of time, it makes the whole process, and it doesn't have to be 4, it can be 3, it can be 5. You don't want to have like 10 areas that you're asking about, but generally, much like the job description, most jobs can be defined in 3 to 5 main buckets of information. And so now you have to think about what types of interview questions do you want to put together. I have heard so many horror stories of people asking yes or no questions. Do you have experience with collection development? Yes. Did that tell us anything? No. The yes or no questions are very vague, and you might be thinking, but people should know that they should add more information. Maybe. But if someone is neurodiverse, or if someone is really nervous in the interview, it might not occur to them. They might be so fixated on just answering the question right that they're not thinking about how they could add. Interviewing is a skill. A lot of hopefully you're not going to have someone that's interviewing all the time, and so they're really, really phenomenal at it. You want to make sure that you are asking in a way that's going to elicit the best response possible, recognizing that people's brains work differently and that you want to get as much information as you can to make an informed decision. So if you don't want to ask yes or no questions, what are some of the types of questions? Well, there's 3 different types that I'm going to talk to you about today. The first is skills-based. So this is where you're going to ask questions about skills. Now, I'm curious, you can share in the chat, how many people here have hired people before? I know just because you're in management or want to be doesn't necessarily mean that you've had an opportunity to hire people. So I'm curious to learn who here has had a chance to hire people. And if you have, yes, okay, so it looks like Emily has, which is great, and Lorena has, which is also great, and Kevin has with an exclamation point. I love that. And Joy has, it looks like, yeah, and several, it looks like, for Holly. Okay, so you guys have some experience with this. If you are at all like I started working in management when I was 19. And I know, what were they thinking? Well, it was a bookstore. So, but I was never taught how to write interview questions. I just was like, what sounds interesting? Or I would, once the internet was more established, I would just go on Google and be like, youth services questions. And one of the things that I've been working on putting together is like a interview question database so that I can just go in and be like, I need a question about customer service, and here's some samples. So if that would ever be of interest, then please let me know and I can toss that in the resource folder. It's still a work in progress, so it's not like finalized, but it's all the questions that I use, and I'm working on categorizing them all. And so yeah, there's also, oh, okay, Joni, I will add it. I will add I better make a note, otherwise I'll forget. And so there's also a lot of turnover in Illinois libraries. So I have never counted how many people I've interviewed or how many positions, but probably I probably interviewed at least 100 people for various positions. So I have developed hopefully some tools that will be helpful to you guys. So skills-based questions, and it sounds like a lot of people here. So when we think about skills-based questions, some of the things that I like to ask about are things like, what tools do you use to stay up to date? I like to ask people about technology. What technology do they use? Especially now where technology changes so rapidly, that can give you a really good sense of, is this person comfortable with troubleshooting and learning? Because a lot of, especially people that work public service desks, we need them to be comfortable helping patrons, right? One of the questions that we always ask in our maintenance jobs when we're hiring a maintenance worker is, and sometimes we'll actually bring a ballast and have them demonstrate, how would you change out a ballast? And what that shows us is it lets us see how they think and and have us walk through how they would change something. So skills are going to be dependent on what type of skills are needed in the position. Now, the good news is if you have strong job descriptions, you've already outlined all the stuff that you need. You just have to go into your job description and look and say, oh, it says here they have to be comfortable with databases. I should probably ask them what familiarity they have with maybe teaching a database class for, elementary school kids. Or maybe it's about how do they learn about a new database and what do they do when you're trying to, when you've updated your catalog, and how do you learn the new things that they've implemented? There's a million different questions, and it's going to be dependent on your library and what you need and what the position needs. The next is behavior-based questions. So I'm curious, has anyone used behavior-based questions before? This is where you ask someone, how would you do this? Or how would you respond? And if you have used behavior-based, do you have any behavior-based questions that you've liked, that you've used when you are asking interview questions? And you can go ahead if you've done any and share in the chat. I love behavior-based questions. These are my favorite, and I have to tell myself I can't only ask these. So it's a good problem to have, but it's, I love the give me an example of, or tell me, how would you deal with this situation? It makes my heart really happy. I see we have some typing, maybe. I know writing it out takes a minute or two. So I'm going to give you guys just a second to put in the chat if you've done any behavior-based ones. Because there is so much, it isn't just the skills, it's, okay, you know that we have a collection development policy. How do you actually apply it? How do you actually use the things that we have in place, which I find is challenging sometimes, right? Like finding out from people, and behavior-based questions can really help with that. And I can see someone's typing, so I'm going to let you type. I'm going to share some of the ones that Oh, yes, the odor one. This is a great one. How would you deal with a visitor whose clothing has a strong, unpleasant odor? Now, one of the things that I've started doing is saying, this is what, if you're looking for something specific, I would hope that when someone was responding to that, they would tell me, well, I would first want to know what our library's policy is. If someone starts the answer with that, I'm like, oh, okay, that's amazing. And then they say, and then I would approach it we try to take a trauma-informed approach at my library. So we would go up and say, check in with the person. Maybe there's a mental health crisis happening. Maybe there's something else. Maybe they don't realize. And so I also like when people say well, I don't know how I would respond to that. So I always ask a question because of book challenges right now. I always ask a question about, what do you do if someone complains about an item? I had a candidate once who was like, oh, I don't know, can I come back to that? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, let's circle back. And so then at the end of the interview, we went back to it. He was like, I really don't know. And the question was how, a parent comes up to the desk unhappy, their child, their 11-year-old had checked out a movie that they felt was inappropriate, and they were upset with the library. What would you do? And then we ended, like, he still didn't know. We ended the interview. He responded the next day with a thank you note and said, and I'm still thinking about that, and I still have no idea how I would respond. And I said, well, let me just tell you what I would want you to say is, thank you so much. We understand your concerns. We have collections that are here for everyone, but that our goal is to provide for the entire community, and we rely on parents to monitor what their children are looking at. Here are some things that we can do, you as a parent can do to help enforce and check in. We don't limit what people can check out, but as a parent, here are some tips that we've done and things that we've seen other parents do that have been successful, and we're happy to help you find material that is age appropriate, that you feel meets the needs for what you would like your child to be watching. Yeah, oh, Holly, I love this one too. How would you handle a situation where a program participant is disrespectful or disruptive? I also like to ask, tell me about a time when you had to handle a situation where a program participant is disrespectful or disruptive. Asking them, so like there's the conceptually, I like conceptual questions of like, how would you? But I also like them, like, give me an example of a time, which helps them to respond. Now, what do they do if they don't have a response? If they say, well, I've not ever experienced that, hopefully the candidate knows to then say, okay, well, tell us how you would respond, but you can also just ask that. And behavior-based questions, because we are dealing with the public, are so critical, and not just in public-facing roles. Our maintenance crew do not interact with the public really, but they do interact with everyone on staff. So I need them to be able to navigate a lot of different requests coming in and know how to respond if someone is, calling you on the walkie-talkie and is like, why isn't this fixed? We need people to be able to We need to understand how people respond to those. The last type of questions that I like to ask are values alignment. This is where you want to check in. What are your library's values, and does this person align with them? If this is someone who's like I had a person recently that finished their library degree, and in their exit interview, they got a full-time job. We were very excited for them, but in their exit interview, they said, it was time for me to move on. There was nothing more I could learn here. They had worked here for a year and a half as a circulation clerk. And that isn't to say that they didn't, maybe they felt that this position, like they had, they just finished their degree. I get it. But that to me was a huge misalignment on our values as an institution of lifelong learning. There's always, to my mind, always something more to learn. And so some of our values at my library are collaboration, innovation. Community partnerships are really key for us, teamwork, inclusion, equity. And so these are some of the questions that we like to ask. And we have a set of questions that everyone on the management team has that they can ask about values alignment that we put together. And that's a really helpful way to have consistency in your hiring practices across your organization. As an organization, we want to know if you're a type of person that really doesn't enjoy working as a member of a team, my library is not the library for you. We do a ton of, almost everything we do is team oriented and team based. Even our story times, we have 2 story time presenters. We do not. But if your library is one where we only have a few people on staff, we need you to be able to work and operate very independently. That's a question you want to ask. So think about the type of environment, not only that you have, but that you also want to continue to foster and create, and what questions you can ask. And between those three, the skill-based, the values alignment, and the behavior-based, you're going to get a really hopefully clear picture of the person. Now, there are some questions that you should never ask. So let's talk about what some of these are. These are from Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There have been additional statutory updates, and how would be a good time? Did the person who asked about the EEOC updates last week, are you here today? I'm going to just mention we're going to talk about that more on Friday, but this does definitely, oh, she is not. Okay. This does definitely play into the new EEOC guidance with the interview questions. They've kind of expanded. All of these are all still things that are protected classes, but they've expanded the definitions behind these. And so you can be sued if you discriminate against someone in an interview process. It isn't just people that are currently employed. It can be potential employees as well as former employees and existing. So we should not ask questions about any of these things. This means that if you are meeting with the person and you're walking to wherever you're going to be doing the interview and you're like, oh, so tell me, do you have any kids? No, do not ask that. Like, oh, you went to so-and-so, what year did you graduate? Nope, don't ask that either. You know, like, oh, I see you're using a cane. Do you, are you able to walk okay? Nope, don't ask that. We need to not ask questions that could influence our brain and cause us, even if we don't mean to discriminate. Now, technically, if you read the law, it is not illegal to ask these questions. What is illegal is to use any of this information to make hiring decisions. So you just don't go down that road, and make sure that if you are, I know we have a number of directors on today, make sure that you know that your managers are not asking these questions as well. My husband used to work for Whole Foods, and he was the manager of the seafood department, and he was doing an interview with the store manager for a position. And the store manager, like, they sat down, they introduced themselves, the candidate introduced themselves, and the store manager said, "You look awfully young. How old are you?" And my husband, he's like, my jaw dropped. Like, I couldn't believe that he asked that. We do so much training. How could he have asked that? And the candidate answered. And then my husband was like, what the heck? Like, that should never have happened. And so even if you don't mean to, just know that once we get information in our head, it's easy to think that we're not being influenced by it, but we probably are. So now some things you can't, like you might, someone might say like, oh, and I immigrated here from so-and-so. Like, okay, so you know that they were not born in the United States. But there are a lot of other things that could also be true, and you don't know. Everyone is an iceberg. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that graphic where it has like just the tip of the iceberg. 90% of an iceberg is underwater. When we think about interview questions, we want to be asking questions about the knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform the job, not any of this stuff. So I'm going to get down off my soapbox. Looking at these questions, which of these questions do you think you could ask a candidate based on what I just shared? You can go ahead and share in the chat. You can write, A, B, C, D, E, F, or G, or if there's a couple. Joni's saying none. Curious what other people think. This is so, every time I do this, I'm always like, if I was answering this, I would be so stressed. Like, I don't want to get it wrong. Maybe D. Yeah, Kevin, fair. And so if you guys are agonizing over this, D, Marie says, okay. And this is where I did do a little bit of a trick. So none, Emily says with a question mark, or like, right? Like, it's like, it's really, when you stop and start thinking about things like what is and is not okay to ask, it's easy to get caught up in your head. Yeah. So short answer, none of these. However, as a couple people said, well, D, almost, you need to reword it. You cannot ask, even if they disclose that they have a disability, you want to ask instead, are you able to perform the essential functions with or without an accommodation? Which is the wording that the ADA recommends. Because you are assuming that they have a disability. Some disabilities are invisible. And so asking someone, are you able to perform these essential functions? Share the job description. These are the things we're going to be asking you to do. Are you able to perform them with or without an accommodation? Because an accommodation is legal, right? Like, we can make an accommodation. And that is the way to ask D without getting into hot water. You also want to ask everyone the same set of questions. It doesn't mean you can't ask follow-up questions, but if you're asking everyone that question, you're not singling out someone that's in a wheelchair or is using a cane and saying, will your disability allow you to shelve? No, you're asking everyone, this job requires you to bend down a lot, to reach up high, and to reach lower shelves, to reach up high. See, I'm even using ableist language. It's like a default, and I keep working on it. You want to think about, what are we asking to test for everyone? This is not an easy thing, so you have to spend some time kind of thinking it through. I think I mentioned this last week. I've become a little bit addicted to using AI to test things and trying to learn more about it. So I recently hired a new HR person. And so for the interview questions, I wrote up all the interview questions and I put it into ChatGPT and I said, acting as an accessibility expert who has 20 years experience working in the HR field, read these questions and tell me any that are problematic from a legal standpoint or that I should reword because they're ableist. And it went through all the questions and it gave me some, it was like, these are good. These you could consider rewording. And it was like, oh, thank you. Now, is that a perfect? No, but it just helped me have like another double check. And that's the thing that you want to do. Just like when we were talking last week, every time that you are going through an interview process, you want to check for equity. There are 20% of people in the country that are disabled. They are the largest minority group. So think about, how am I preparing the interview questions, the interview process? Think about the words that you're using. Think about how you can use it to reinforce your values, and think about your own assumptions that you're bringing to the table. So when you are in the interview, this is great to hear. So Kevin shared that Vermont also bans asking about a candidate's previous salary history. Many states are now banning. Illinois has banned that as well. And starting next year, if you have 5 or more employees, you'll have to list a salary range or hourly rate. This helps close the gender pay gap for sure. And spoiler alert, people work because they need money. Yes, people love libraries, but we're doing it because we love doing the work, but we also need to be paid. So when you are in the interview, here are some things to think about. Give a high-level overview. What does the job entail? Make sure that candidates have a chance to ask their questions. We like to give candidates a tour, even if it's like only 5 or 10 minutes. Make sure that you're sharing next steps. This is one of my pet peeves. If you've ever applied for a job and just never heard anything, or interviewed and never heard anything, that sucks. We should be following up with everyone that applies and saying, hey, this job has been filled, or, thank you for interviewing. Being ghosted by an employer sucks. And so make sure this is something that is telling them about your culture. If they're not hearing back from you, what assumptions are they making? Even if you eventually offer it to someone, if they felt like the interview process was really long, it's not going to be great. So think about, again, stopping and pausing before. Don't just throw a job ad up. Pausing and reflecting on what you actually need is a really helpful way, and thinking through the whole process, because it ties directly into onboarding. So now that you've interviewed someone and you've offered them the job and they're amazing, it's time, and they've accepted, and it's time for them to start. So who can tell me, when does onboarding actually begin? Because we talk about onboarding a lot, like, oh, we need to onboard this person, oh, we need to train the new person. But when does it actually start? So Lorena's saying before the start date to get W-4s in place. I'm seeing someone typing, so I'm going to give it just a second to see. With the job description, Joni, you were listening last week. As soon as you offer someone the position, Holly says. Okay, so this is me, my belief. This is not this is not like a legal, like this is when it starts. To me, onboarding begins with the job description. It begins the minute someone reads your job ad to learn about the position, because that is their first interaction with your library, assuming that they're an outside candidate and they haven't been working there, right? This happens well before they begin. And every interaction you have through the interview process, through the hiring process, through filling out forms is onboarding. It starts before the first day. I like to make sure that their desk is cleaned. If they have a desk area, make sure there's a name tag ready to go. Make sure that we have their email access. Like, depending on what the hiring process was, I often am hiring a lot of managers as a director. So a week before they start, I'll send an email. Usually after we offer them the job and they accept, I'll send an email like, hey, I'm so excited. I can't wait to have you start. I'm really looking forward to working with you. And then like, a week before, or a few days before, like, hey, I'm so excited. I'm going to meet you here, or my HR person will meet you here. We'd love to take you out for lunch on your first day if you're interested. And, kind of telling them what they can expect. I am a very nervous person, which surprises many people, but in my safe environment, I'm very confident. And so on the first day, walking into a new job is anxiety provoking. And so for me, I want to let people know what they can expect. Like, hey, you're starting right at 9. We'll meet you in the lobby, or come to the business office. We'll be filling out paperwork, and then we'll be doing a tour, and then we'll give you a chance to like get your technology set up. So the first day is going to be largely like form-based. Let people know what to expect. It helps not only with people like me that get very anxious, but also people that are neurodiverse, and frankly, just everyone. Now, there are some legal forms that you do have to make sure they do on their first day. People want to get paid. We already covered that. They are working. Yes, they may love it, but they also are doing it for a paycheck. The W-4s have to be completed before their first paycheck is issued. You also need them to fill out an I-9 form. Just as a FYI, I-9s should be kept in a separate binder altogether from employee personnel files. So if you have those together, separate those out. If you ever have an I-9 audit done, they will look and you will get dinged. I don't know what the ding is, but you'll get dinged if it's not separated. You also will often have people have to fill out benefit forms. Something, if it's full-time, if you're offering medical, dental, life insurance, you want to make sure that you tell them when you need the forms back. It might not be the first day. Some libraries start insurance on the first day, some it's like the month after. It just really depends on your insurance. You need to have an emergency contact form. Direct deposit. Just as a reminder, legally, in the United States, we cannot require someone to do direct deposit. I currently have 4 staff that do not do direct deposit. And everyone's like, oh yeah, it's people that are older. Nope. I have people that I have a teenager, someone in their 30s, someone in their 50s, and someone in their 70s. So you cannot require someone to do direct deposit. Just remember that. You also are going to want to give them your personnel policies. We talked about that last week. This is really important. Having an acknowledgement form that they can go over, that they can sign off on, that they read and understood, is also important. Just a quick note, one other legal thing, if they are doing these forms, that is considered work time. If you send someone these forms to fill out ahead of time, and they fill them out and bring them in on their first day, you have to pay them for that. That, according to the Department of Labor, is considered compensable time. And so that is why I don't ever, you totally can do that. If you're like, we want to hit the ground running, we're going to tell them, and then we'll just put it on their paycheck. Fine. But know that filling out the forms is part of their work day and you have to pay them for it. I found that there's a lot of people that don't realize that. So I always try and remind people. These are all really important. As you can see, some are more library focused, some are more legal. The first day, you want to think about how are you going to introduce them to the library as a whole, right? And you're going to want to do a tour. You may have done this during the interview process like we talked about, but and you don't have to do everything on day one, but how do you, show them where the emergency exits are? Where can they put their lunch if they have a lunch that they're bringing? Where are the, if you have a special collection for something, like, oh, we have our local collection with local authors, that's so cool. Or we collect clowns and this is the creepy room that they're in. Whatever it is, make sure that they're aware. Get their technology set up. Hopefully their email address and stuff is set up ahead of time. If there's a computer login, get all of that set up so on day one they can sit down and get it set. I know at my library now we have IT staff. At my last library, I was the one that did all of that. So making space in the day to just go through all of that and get someone set up will make sharing other information much easier. You want to introduce people. This is part of welcoming them into the culture. One of the things that I like, well, this is one of my dreams. We do a photo and we have a photo directory for staff. We also, in my, someday this is going to happen. I want to have a phonetic name directory. My name is really easy. It's Kate Hall. They have a lot of people, some people's names are not as easy to pronounce. And so having someone record their name so that people can pronounce it properly is a great way to help people feel welcomed. And then you want to think about some library-wide stuff that you are doing. This is going to include maybe training if they're a person in charge on how to handle situations, going over policies. What are the things that everyone in the library needs to know? From a department standpoint, there's a number of things that you can do as well. And I'm going to kind of skip over because we need to get into the discipline stuff, but maybe you have people job shadow and they follow and work with someone on desk or work with someone when they're doing the pick list or whatever it is. You want to set clear expectations for the role. This is going to be, I like to go through the job description and be like, here are my expectations. I also have an expectation document that I give to all new managers that says, here are the expectations that I have for you as a member of the management team. And then here is what you can expect from me as the director. Setting clear expectations is the kindest thing you can do for people, and it's best to do that as part of the onboarding process. It's also helpful because there's often a lot of unwritten norms of things that just happen, like, well, we just do it that way. Giving someone a department or library buddy that they can go to that isn't their boss is a great way to help them feel welcomed and included. And the department buddy can check in with them and be like, hey, do you have any questions? Or, oh, just FYI, most people take their morning break at like 10:30 and we like to go sit outside by the pond and feed the ducks or whatever. Having a training checklist is also helpful. You're going to have some sample training checklists in the resources that I shared. And then having one-on-one meetings is important not only for onboarding, but also just in general. This helps you set those expectations, check in with people, see where they're at with their training. And then I have regular one-on-one meetings with everyone that reports to me. And this just continues. When they start, it's more frequent, and then it goes to like once a month once they're fully onboarded. So when does onboarding actually end? And short answer is it depends, because if you are a shelver, it might not take as long as, say, if you're a manager, where it might take a full year before you fully understand all of the processes. So you need, but it's helpful to say like, okay, we're now moving from onboarding into maintenance, right? So it's kind of like when you buy a new car and you got that new car smell and eventually it wears off and you have to do the continual maintenance, right? At a certain point, you're like, oh yeah, I just need to get the oil changed. So we are institutions of lifelong learning. And so onboarding, while you will be onboarded and that will end, learning should never end. And so you want to impress upon staff that we want learning to be a continual process and something that will continue throughout the life cycle, throughout the time that you are here with us. And so, yeah, if you have a probationary period, as Lorena's talking about in the chat, that might be the end of the onboarding. Or for me, it's okay, we've completed all of the training, everything on our training checklist, and so now we are transitioning. And I like to actually say this, so now we are transitioning out of onboarding into ongoing feedback and performance management. And I find it's helpful because it lets people's brains know we're switching. So obviously, if you've laid out clear expectations, it is helpful to, well, we are always hopeful that our staff are going to be performing really well. Unfortunately, that does not always happen. So now we're going to talk about like the not as much fun stuff, but the stuff that's really important, and that I find that libraries, we're often kind of conflict averse, and so we tend to like not deal with this stuff and not deal with discipline. I also hate the term discipline because it feels very punitive. And so I'd like to know, when you hear the word discipline, what do you think of? What is discipline? What does discipline mean to you at your library? And I'll share what it means to me at my library. To me, discipline is about how we hold people accountable. We lay out clear expectations, but then we actually hold them accountable and say, we expect you to do the things that are in your job description, to be able to do your essential functions, to be able to meet our service standards. And so for me, discipline, I've reframed it in my head as it's an accountability check. It is a way of holding people accountable for the work that they are doing. So how do you see it? You can go ahead and share in the chat what you think of when you think about discipline. This is the part that I always struggle with, of like leaving enough silence so people can type in different things. All right, maybe you guys are feeling like, I don't know what it is. I don't know how to define it. Maybe it is hard to define. A review of expectations. Yeah, I think it's also about making sure expectations are clear and people have a path to meeting them. Emily, yeah, I love that. The path to meeting them is critical. You can't just hold people accountable or tell people they're not doing their job if you haven't given them the tools to be successful. It also really ties in strongly to your culture. There's a thing that I've done called your discipline philosophy, and it walks you through how do you actually pause and think about how do we approach discipline as an organization? What does it mean to us so that you can be consistent across your organization? It's hard because you want, if one manager is holding someone super accountable for being on time and another manager is like, if they're 5 or 10 minutes late, I don't really care. As long as they're not on desk, it's not a big deal. You need to know as an institution, how are we going to approach discipline? And that relates back to your organization values, right? So for me, lifelong learning, collaboration, teamwork, equity, inclusion, those are all really important. And I want to make sure that if we're telling people that we want them to be lifelong learners and then we discipline them for failing at something, we've just failed them because we're telling them, oh, we don't actually mean you can learn. We can mean you have to be perfect all the time and you can't really learn. And so having a progressive discipline policy is really important in your handbook or your personnel policies because it lays out clear guidelines over what your employees can expect. And so it typically has 4 steps: a verbal warning, a written warning, a suspension, or sometimes a performance improvement plan, and termination. So we're going to walk through what these might look like because this is the guidelines that you want to follow. Again, you need to make sure as an organization you're being consistent. So the first is verbal. Now, obviously, a formal progressive discipline policy is something, it isn't just like, oh, hey, I noticed this. It's a little bit more formal. So hopefully you've already had an informal conversation with them. Let's just use the example of, this is my pet peeve. I want everyone who enters a department to be acknowledged in some way. Maybe it's you make eye contact, maybe it's just the staff at the desk looks up, maybe they say hello, and we have someone that refuses to greet or acknowledge patrons when they're walking in. So I've already talked with them and said, hey, this is something that is a key metric for library success, and we want you to be acknowledging each person. Now, I recognize that not everyone is great with this, and so here are some things you can do. You might not feel comfortable saying hi, but we want you to be looking up and around and noticing if people are entering the department. If they're getting closer to the desk, say, hi, is there anything I can help you with? That is my expectation for everyone that works a public service desk. And so being really clear. If, however, you have these informal conversations and nothing happens, then it's time for a more formal conversation, still verbal. And you want to ask them hey, we've talked about this. I noticed that you have not been greeting people or acknowledging people as they're entering the department. That's something we've talked about. Is there something, that you want to talk about with that? Or is there additional training? What can we do to help you become comfortable with this? And you're not telling them wow, you suck as an employee, you're not doing this. You're asking them hey, I laid out my expectation. You're not doing it. What's going on? You might find that there's something else going on, oh, well, I didn't want to share this, but I actually am autistic. I have a really hard time meeting people's eyes. And so then it's oh, okay. Well, so another way you can acknowledge people is maybe once, every 15 minutes, you just get up and walk around and just check and say, hey, is there anything I can help you with, where you're asking people a very specific question, or you can brainstorm. We often come to things assuming we know why someone is behaving the way they are, but they don't. We don't know that. We only know what we are observing, and our observations can sometimes be biased. So having a verbal conversation with them where you say, hey, this is our expectation. I do need you, I need you to be on time for your desk shifts. When you're not on time, it impacts other people that maybe need to go to lunch or that are getting ready for a program. And so it's really important that you arrive on time. Um, can you do that? Can you commit to, making sure that you are here at the time of your shift? Even with a verbal warning, one of the things you want to do with people is you want to follow up in writing because people learn differently, especially in stressful situations where someone is being told they're not doing something. They might not hear all the words you're saying. So following it up in writing with an email saying, hey, as we talked about, I just wanted to follow up and share, like, thanks for talking today. As we talked about, we want to make sure you're on time for your desk shift, or we want to make sure that you're acknowledging patrons when they come into the department. Moving forward, my expectation is that you will do this consistently. Now, hopefully that will be the end of it. Things are good, but sometimes it doesn't improve. And then it comes time to do a written warning. And I have some sample templates that are included in the resources so you can see. The key with the written warning is tie it back into the expectations you have set. So whether it's maybe you have service standards, maybe it's from the job description, maybe it's from a policy. And then, and this is a hard thing to do, you should put on there what the ramifications are if they do not improve. Now, this is something that is really, really hard to do. This is very uncomfortable because we're basically saying, I'm holding you accountable for this. This is a very like legalese way of saying this. It's a very attorney way of saying it. I don't particularly care for it, but our attorneys have also said, like, no, you need to say it this way. But it is really important. And then when you're in the meeting, once you have your written warning, you actually need to meet with the person. This is the part that's always agonizing for me. I can write things up, no problem, but sitting down with someone, this is where you want to keep it simple. State, why are we here? As we've discussed several times, and I talked with you about last week, it's really important that you are on time for your desk shift so that other people can, leave when they, to go to lunch or do programs or whatever. You want to be direct. You don't want to say, it'd be really great if you could be on desk. Well, so-and-so is never on time. Thank you for letting me know that, but this is about you right now. Don't get sucked into trying to negotiate like, well, it's really hard to be on time because blah, blah, blah. Like, nope, this is my expectation. This is what I need from you. In an ideal world, you will have someone there as a witness. If you are a manager, having another manager, or if you're the director, having a manager in there, having a witness there helps because sometimes you are in a heightened emotional state. You might not be hearing everything they are saying. Having someone else there confirms, and it also makes sure that there isn't any type of harassment or discrimination going on. You want to also ask for a signature. So once you've met and said, this is my expectation, again, we're giving you a formal written warning. I like to give it to them. I like to verbally tell them and then hand them the paper and give them a minute to read over it and then ask if they have any questions. And then at the end of the form, it asks for a signature. Now, the signature is not to say that they agree with what's there. The signature is just to confirm that you had this conversation and that they received the written warning. Now, sometimes people refuse to sign. So what do? They're like, I'm not signing this. Okay. There's a couple things. This is surprising how often it works. I've done this where I'm like, okay, could you just write on there that you refuse to sign and sign that? Half the time, if they refuse to sign, they'll do that because they're thinking that they're agreeing with it, but that isn't. But that's also why you have a witness, because then the witness can sign confirming that they got the letter that you gave it to them. Hopefully after this, the employee is like, oh, crap, this is really serious. I'm on it. Okay, I got this. I'm not going to be late to the desk anymore, or it's not going to be a consistent thing, right? But sometimes it doesn't fix the problem. And this is where in your progressive discipline policy, depending on what you have laid out, you might have a second written warning. It might be a suspension. It might be a performance improvement plan. If it's a second written warning, you can write up something similar, documenting the issue and your expectations. If your policy calls for a suspension, you want to provide that in writing. I often go to a performance improvement plan because usually if we have gotten to this point, like, why is this not getting resolved? Why is this person not improving or able to do this? So who here has ever done a PIP? You can go ahead and share in the chat. Have you ever done a PIP for an employee? And can you tell kind of like, what is a performance improvement plan? And spoiler alert, I have some samples in the resources that you're gonna get. So you can see if you've not ever written one before, which I had not. Like when I was a manager, I'd never written one. I'd never even heard of it. And then when I became a director, I learned about them. I'm like, this is helpful. And so the goal with it is, it's not a punishment goal. Our ultimate goal should always be focused on how can we help the employee be successful in their role, right? And so I see some people typing, so I'm going to just give you a minute to say, what is the performance improvement plan, or a PIP as it's called, which always makes me think of Charles Dickens. I don't know why, because I was an English lit major, that's probably why. And so it looks like, well, maybe it's typing. I'm going to just share what my definition is, which is my definition of a PIP is, it is a tool that lays out what your expectations are and then gives kind of like a project plan for how you want them to meet those expectations, and provides additional training or tools to make sure the employee has what they need to be successful. It's similar to a contract, and it outlines what work needs to be done within a specific time period in order to course correct wherever the issue is. And it looks like Lorena came up with template letters for someone. Oh, yeah. So like sorry, I should read this out loud for the chat. So not a PIP, but came up with template letters for someone who needed to send out letters, but had a tendency to transpose numbers within a financial department. That's great, right? Like, we are all going to be humans, right? So we're all going to make mistakes, but how can we help each other, right? The goal of this is not to fire someone. The goal of this is to help them be successful. Yeah, that's a great accommodation. So in a PIP, when you're doing it, you want to summarize, like, as we've talked about on these dates, this is, at these times, these are the expectations we have. Then you want to give those resources. And then maybe they're going to take a class on time management. Maybe you want them to work with someone else. Maybe you want them to outline their schedule and walk through it with you every week so that they know like when things are due. The resources are going to be dependent on the type of issue. And then you want to create a timeline. Most PIPs should be 30 or 60 days. I know someone that did a PIP once for 9 months. That is ridiculous and so stressful. You want to give them enough time to improve, but you don't want this to become so long that it feels like you're targeting them and trying to get rid of the employee. You also need to define what type of deliverables to show that they're improving. Maybe they're going to do a weekly write-up of what they accomplished if they're having trouble turning things in on time. Maybe they're going to meet with you, like I said, to review things every other week. Whatever you're asking them to do, put it in the PIP. And just as with the written warning, you want to sit down with them and ask them to sign off on it. Are you noticing a theme? The sign-off theme? It's an important theme, so just keep that in mind. And you can see some samples. Now, just like with anything else, there are good things and bad things to do with discipline. If we are holding people accountable, we probably are in a position of power over them. We should never, ever behave in a way that exerts our power in an unhealthy or discriminatory fashion. There's also some legal things we need to be careful of. If someone has made a claim or asked for an accommodation or requested FMLA leave or been on workers' comp, and then you write them up because you're unhappy that they were out or because they needed an accommodation, that is illegal and that is retaliation. So make sure that you are being thoughtful in how you're doing it. And if you're not sure, this is when it's a good idea to talk to your attorney. I always feel a little silly saying this. You should never yell at someone. You should never yell at someone. I know of a assistant director at a library that used to go out on the floor and yell at staff on service desks. I was appalled. You should certainly never do it in front of members of the public or other staff. And yelling at people, there's a number of reasons not to do it, not only because it's a jerk move. When someone yells at you, it shuts down receptors in your brain. So neurologically, if you are yelling at someone, their brain shuts off. They cannot hear what you are saying. So when we think about discipline, what we want is for the employee to be successful. If you are yelling at them, they literally cannot hear what you are saying. And so they are not going to be able to improve because their brain isn't going to be able to process that information. Whereas, and I mean, maybe this was because I grew up in an Irish Catholic household. I prefer the I'm just so disappointed. But speaking calmly allows them to hear what you're saying. And you know that when you're yelling, it feels personal, right? If you're saying hey, I noticed that you've been coming late to the desk, that's impacting others. And it's making it hard for people to get their full lunch breaks in. Could you, let's talk about it. What's going on? They're going to be much more receptive. I also find in a lot of libraries, unfortunately, we ignore issues. Is there anyone here who has ever had someone that they worked with who was not performing and you had to pick up the slack for them? I know I have. And I get so mad. Why aren't they holding them accountable? We as managers, yes, too much, right? As managers, our job is to manage our employees and make sure that they are doing their job. Now, sometimes that means an accommodation, right? But we have a duty not just to that employee, but to the other employees. And I guarantee you, if you are disciplining someone or if we're going to talk about termination next, you need to think about the impact it's having. And anytime I've terminated someone, there's always been a ton of stuff that comes up after that. I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, it was so much worse than I realized. Not that that means that you should just go about terminating people willy-nilly, but know that there's often things that other staff in an effort to protect people, they don't want to be, the tattletale. Ignoring issues, though, helps no one. It doesn't help the employee. It doesn't help their coworkers. It certainly doesn't help the library. We also want to be timely. You should never hold off on addressing personnel issues until the annual evaluation. You want to do it as issues arise and handled right in that moment. So this is hard to do, right? Because I don't know about you guys, I hate telling people when they're not doing something well. And I hate having to have these hard conversations with people. I write out a script for myself that makes it easier to focus on what I need to say so I don't get caught up in but it's really or softening my language. Brene Brown has a saying, clear is kind. And I really like that because kindness means that you are being clear with them and you are telling them hey, I really need you to turn in your monthly reports on time because I rely on those to write my director's report for the board packet. And so it's really important that I get it when it's due, right? By the 7th of each month. When you are disciplining people, just like with job descriptions and policies and also with interviewing, you also want to use it as an opportunity to think about whether you're being equitable. consider the words that you are using. Don't ever approach it as a thing that people say like, hey, sorry, I'm reading what's in the chat, which Jenny, this is great. A no surprises rule when it comes to annual performance reviews. Yeah, it should be a summary. It does help put everyone at ease. It should never be like, I don't know, is the other shoe going to drop? Are they going to tell me? And make sure in the performance review that you also mention if there was a performance issue and that it's gotten better, right? You should know about it immediately, right? Think about, are you being consistent? How are you saying it? Are you attacking the person? Like, well, you obviously don't care about the library if you're never on time. Well, that's not fair. You're assuming that you know why their behavior. Instead, you can say, I noticed that you are regularly late to your desk shift, right? Identify the behavior. Don't focus on the personal motives because you don't know what those are. This is also another great opportunity. As a library, we value teamwork and collaboration. I noticed that you have not been working well with blah, blah, blah in summer reading. This is something that we do as a department, so we need everyone working together, and I expect you to be able to work effectively with your coworkers. We all assume things. I had a employee who was regularly 10 minutes late, and her manager got so upset, and she was an amazing employee. She's like, I want to write her up. And I'm like, well, we're not writing her up until you have a conversation with her. And so she brought her in and she said, hey, you're always 10 minutes late, when you're opening, and like, that's a problem because we need you here to open the library. And she's like, well, I'm a single mom. I have to drop my daughter off. I'm not allowed to drop her off until this time. And the soonest I can get here is 10 minutes later. When I start at 9:30, it's not a problem. Oh, okay. So if we shifted you and have you always start at 9:30, it is not going to be a problem. It was never a problem again. Now, if she had written her up, the employee might not have shared that. She might have been upset. So think about how you can approach whether or not, what assumptions you are making when you are talking to people. Now, sometimes despite your best efforts, despite being clear in expectations, giving people the tools they need, it doesn't work well. We then turn to the last step in our progressive discipline policy, which is a termination. This sucks. If it is an involuntary termination where you are firing someone, I have felt sick to my stomach. I have felt sad. There have been one or two times when I have been a little bit excited. I felt terrified. Terminations are not easy. They should never be easy. You are changing someone's life. Now, granted, they weren't doing their job, but it still is really hard to do because we care about people. These are people we work with. And so if you do not have someone performing, it is in their best interests, in the library's best interests. And it's not fair to them. Like, imagine consistently failing at your job and how that must feel. I'm not suggesting that firing people is a kindness, but I will say that if you have done everything you can, then you are doing what is best for the library. At times, you might need to consult your attorney. Depending on the type of termination, if you have not ever terminated someone before, I strongly recommend the attorney will walk you through what to do. Lawsuits do happen. That is not a reason to not fire someone. I've heard that before, like, well, they didn't want to be sued. We have liability insurance for this. And chances are, I have been sued a couple times as a library in my 14 years as a director. It sucks, but insurance covered it. And the cases didn't have merit, but that's a whole other. So before you like go down the path of like, well, we can't because we might get sued, just remember, like, that can happen. That is why insurance happens. Before you decide to terminate someone, there's a couple really important questions that I always ask myself and that you should ask some version of these for yourself. Have you laid out clear expectations? Have you given them the necessary training to be successful? Have you provided clear, direct feedback on what is needed? Have you helped them in every way possible to ensure their success? If you can answer yes to every single one of these questions, you're golden. If you're like, well, I wasn't really clear on my expectations. Well, I never really told them that they were doing anything wrong. Then you, as the manager, didn't do your job yet. You don't get to fire them until you do your job. Go back, hit reset, try again. And then you're going to start reviewing your paperwork. Remember all that documentation and signing off? You're going to have all of that beautifully laid out. Every time I meet one-on-one with someone, I keep notes. I keep notes on the positive things that happen, on the course corrections that we need. I do it in an Excel spreadsheet because that's how my brain works. Maybe you write it in a notebook. I certainly can. And you'll have these slides as well. So you will have this in there. So you can also screenshot this if you want to put, like I keep these printed out on my, you can't see it, but there's like by my desk. So making sure you have all of your paperwork in order, keeping track of things helps for a number of reasons. There's a lot of steps to take, so you want to make a plan. You need to think about the technology, the passwords. We're going to talk about offboarding in just a sec. In the termination letter, there's some samples in the resources. You're going to summarize. We talked on these dates. This was the issue. This was our expectation. You are still not meeting that. State, you are being terminated. Every state has different requirements. Everyone needs to include COBRA information if you have insurance. Every state has different unemployment requirements. Some people might need to have a pamphlet. Some people might need to just tell them, whatever your state requires, and then have a signature line. Again, this is for them to acknowledge they received it, not that they agree with it. Then you want to write a script. I have a really hard time doing terminations. It makes me really anxious. When I get nervous, I tend to talk more. And so I have a script. You will get a sample of my script. You can use it if you so choose. You want to keep it pretty brief. Practicing ahead of time is a really good idea. The termination itself should only take about 5 to 10 minutes. And it might sound something like this. Hi, thank you so much for meeting. As you know, we have had you on a performance improvement plan and have had numerous conversations talking about your work, and you continue to have issues turning things in on time, and you have not been able to consistently meet our expectations. As a result, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. And then you can give them the letter. They may want to argue with you, like, well, they may start crying. I had a person who thought they were having a heart attack and we had to call the ambulance. We had to pause the term meeting and call an ambulance. They were not. It was a panic attack, which still sucked for them. And then we came back and finished the termination, which also sucked. And it should only take about 5 to 10 minutes. Unlike when you are doing a performance improvement plan or a written warning, where you're trying to find a way to help them be successful and talk about what do you need, the time for those conversations is over. This is now, we have made a decision. This is the decision. What are the next steps? And so Jenny asked a great question. Can you request no phones or other recording devices for termination meetings? Yeah, Illinois is a two-party consent state. In order to record someone, you have to have both parties verbally agree to the recording. I am not sure about Vermont. I don't know. I'm hoping Joy or Kevin might know If not, you can say, I'd like us to turn our phones off, or I'd like to leave it, so we don't have those here. I don't tell people ahead of time. I don't send out a meeting invite. I just usually call and say, hey, I would like you to come to my office, or can you come and meet me in the study room, or wherever you're meeting. I'm just making a note so I can double check on the recording piece. And so you absolutely can request that. In the termination, it's really easy to get caught into an argument like, well, and to try and justify. I understand that you are upset. However, we have taken many steps to reach this point, and now this is effective. I will escort you to go get your items, and your last paycheck will be issued on such and such a date. Because I do get nervous, I will sometimes say, I have something that I'd like to read, and then I will answer any questions. And then I'll read the termination script. I'll hold it so that I don't go off script. That's fine too. After the termination, it's challenging. You're gonna feel it. I mean, I feel it in my stomach. I mistakenly did a termination right before a manager's meeting once. Oh God, that was such a bad idea. Don't schedule something right after. Go whatever you need. Maybe it's having a piece of chocolate. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's I'm going to do this and then go home because I need to decompress. It is hard. It is hard to terminate someone. It is hard for them, but it is also hard for us, right? Because you know you're changing something. Then we get into the offboarding. And in an ideal world, you would have a lot of time. If you have a regular termination where someone gave notice, then you can have them give you a list of the projects they're working on, their accounts and passwords. If they're part of a bargaining unit, there might be requirements with unions. If it's an involuntary termination, you're going to need to kind of piece that together yourself. You want to work closely to remove all access to technology. If you think that someone is going to be upset, if it's an involuntary termination, make sure that that's set up ahead of time so that they can't go in and do anything. You want to think about how to notify people about what is going on. Staff, you probably want to send an email saying this person is no longer working here. They're welcome to visit the public areas, but they're not able to visit the staff areas. If it is a voluntary termination, it's like, hey, so-and-so is retiring, we wish them well. You want to tell people what is going on, but you need to check with the person if it's a voluntary termination to see what they want. They might say, I don't want a big deal. I don't want a party. Ask them what they want. This is instead of the golden rule, it's the platinum rule. Don't treat people how you would like to be treated. Treat people how they would like to be treated. And I have samples of all of these communications and notifications. You also need to let people know, like once you've announced the news, let people know so-and-so is going to be taking over their collection. So-and-so is going to be doing the programs. We're going to be bringing in extra help to do blah, 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 or whatever it is of who's doing what. There's also a lot of legal stuff that you need to work on. I recommend doing an exit interview because this is a chance for you to get some valuable insights from the person departing, not if you're firing them, but if they're leaving of their own volition. I have a termination checklist in the resources that you can see that we use at my library. And then you want to make sure before they leave that you have have their contact info, like, do you know where you're sending the check? Have they packed up and gotten all their personal items? Have they changed and put an away message on their email and their voicemail? Again, if you're firing someone, you're going to need to do some of that. If the person is leaving, you can set that all up ahead of time. Okay, things you have to give everyone. A final paycheck. Depending on your state, most states require that you give the final paycheck, that you give it at the most the next pay period, whatever that is, that you can't wait and wait to pay them 3 months. You also have to pay out vacation. This is legally required by every single state. So you have to pay out their vacation in that last paycheck. Every state has different requirements for what information you need to give about unemployment. So you have to give them some type of information, but check with your state about what that information is. For us in Illinois, we have to give it to every person leaving, even if we know they're leaving for another job or to retire, we still have to give it to every single person. Your state, Vermont, might only require it if you're terminating someone. And then COBRA. This is to extend health insurance coverage. So obviously not every person gets this, but if they have health insurance at your library, you need to provide them with information on this. And this is where they pay for the health insurance and can extend it for 18 months after they leave. So the key here is all about preparation. Checklists are your best friend when it comes to onboarding and offboarding. And that is why I've given you some checklists. So you also want to think about what are all the places that you have someone's name? Like we have all of our managers listed on our website. So if they leave, we want to make sure that we update that, right? Phone extension lists, if you have vendors that they work with. What about for payroll? Thinking about all of the things that you interact with and where things are. It's much easier if you make a checklist. It's going to be different for each library. So I know we're a little bit over on time. As I mentioned, so last week we talked about laying that strong foundation, and hopefully you heard even more this week about how important job descriptions are. And then this week we talked about the steps to take in hiring, in onboarding, as well as how to handle discipline, termination, and offboarding. And if you take nothing else away, I hope that what you remember is take a beat, pause, and see what you can think. Like, don't just jump into things. I tend to be like a jumping into things person. Pause and ask yourself, what do we need here? And that it doesn't have to be perfect. If, for instance, you're like, I don't have an offboarding checklist. The next time someone leaves, just start writing down as things occur to you. Maybe you forgot it and it's a month later. Then just keep adding stuff to the list. None of us have to be perfect. In fact, none of us can be because we're human. So we have one more opportunity for us to come together. And I hope if you have questions, you will send them to me, or if you would like to, you are welcome to come questions and bring them there. We're going to have a form that you can submit, so you can still submit anonymously on Friday. Oh, I wrote June 18th instead of the 28th. It is 2/8, not 1/8. That already happened. I don't know how to type numbers. I apparently also could use a checklist for that. And I hope that you will stay in touch. If I have more resources on my website, of course, Joy will be sharing with all of you the information that you have with all the resources. And I look forward to hopefully seeing a lot of you on Friday. And I'm going to just stop screen sharing and just see. I don't think that there were any other questions that we missed. Oh, Joy, thank you for saying that they're in the Vermont collection available via ILL. They're also available from a bunch of, yeah. Okay, so Lorena's asking, sign off means